If you are a McLaren fan right now, I think you probably want to hear this. And I think you'll probably want to do this. Because Zach, you probably got what you wanted, but probably not the way you wanted it to happen. We start off with the losers, and McLaren, obviously. Because another weekend where the drivers did their best, the team dropped the ball again. Right when they couldn't afford to. And this will sting even more than Vegas because they definitely had the fastest car this weekend. We had a safety car at the worst possible moment, strategically speaking. Lap 7, the first lap you could actually make a stop and still have 2 stops. And so therefore, when the safety car came out, everyone was like, yes, we are going in. But McLaren decided, nah, we want to be like, flexible. Or they just couldn't make a decision. And I'm thinking it's the latter. They just couldn't choose which one to pit first, because then it might not have been fair. And then according to the likes of Stella, they chose not to double stack, even though technically they could have, because there was like 7 seconds between Oscar and Lando. Lando would have been hurt more than Oscar. What more do I need to say? And yes, it might have looked a bit bold and brave, but then Verstappen decided not to respond to them and go in as well, and he chose to be one of the first people on the road to stay out. And then we got what we got. Oops, one risk too many. Because the safety car is pretty rigid. And the shot of Zach Brown genuinely commiserating Oscar Piastri in the media pen, whom Zach admitted was the better driver that day, whereas Oscar had driven impeccably, whereas Lando had only driven very well, it was a telling one. And then what Ten Kravitz said was that usually Zach and Stella are available to talk immediately after the race, but this wasn't the case. They ran away to get their stories straight. And I reckon that even Lando fans had to admit that on the day, Piastri did everything he could to at the very least keep the championship race going into Abu Dhabi, even though Lando still would have enough points to at least make it somewhat comfortable. But then, their man fell as low as 5th place after their second stops. Lando, he lost the chance of a podium right there and then. And when you consider what happened before that, it was just, rubbing salt into the wound after having been mugged by Verstappen at turn 1, cleanly may I add. And then it was a miracle that George Russell had a howler of the start, or else Lando might have lost another place. And then, of course, he only regained 4th place at the end of the day due to Antonelli going wide and having a bit of a wobble, and it helped that Norris had fresher tyres in which to push. And for no other reason. I'll explain in Kimi's section later. Now, Max is right behind him, having cut his deficit to Lando again in half. To think that just before Vegas, Max was nearly 50 points behind Lando, now he's only 12, and if Lando loses this title, it really wouldn't surprise me if this is the beginning of the end of his time at McLaren. These kind of operational and strategic errors, especially at this time in his career, these are really unwelcome. And what's also very unwelcome and critical is what's going on over at Ferrari. It was horrible, simple as. The signs were already there in the sprint with Leclerc's poor launch, and the race only proved that point in stereo. Once again, Leclerc fell down the order, and he succumbed to the likes of Nico Hülkenberg. So that's the other Ferrari, the German, has actually made a race weekend rather miserable. And then ultimately, the only reason that Leclerc got back into the points was due to other people's misfortune, notably Hülkenberg's misfortune, as well as Gasly's, as well as Hadjar. So, realistically, there could have been a point where neither Ferrari driver scored. This just feels really, really surreal at the moment. Then somewhat tempered by the fact that Vasseur claims that proper development on the SF25 ceased not that long after their double disqualification, when they realised the car had a fundamental problem that really could not be fixed properly, unless you took away time from next year's car. And then Hamilton's race summed up the rest for the team. Starting on an aggressive soft tyre strategy, it might have worked had the safety car not come out and forced everyone to do a pit stop, and then Ferrari did a double stack and resulted in Lewis finishing P12 and stuck in a DRS train behind the Alonso Express. And then, my god, Haas. The raw pace was actually decent too. That was the only decent thing about their weekend. No joke. The upgraded car from Austin has actually proven to be rather potent and has given Haas a really decent shot at maintaining 7th place in the Constructors. 6th might be tricky, but 7th, oh for sure. Well, that is until procedural and executional errors came up the wazoo of not only Esteban Ocon, but also Oliver Bearman. especially Oliver Bearman, who may get the award for the biggest crash out I have seen whilst inside an F1 car already. And amidst all of this, from one point, I saw Esteban exploit the chaos so much and that he chose to stay out that little bit longer. He got up to as high as 3rd. But then that got completely wasted due to the fact that he got pinged for a jump start, even though neither Haas or Esteban could explain exactly what happened. Well, I mean, it was a jump start, it was so minute, it might have been even more minute or insignificant as Antonelli's, and he got pinged for it. And yes, even though it did bring him up to the dizzying heights of P3, that was an element of hesitation, and that hesitation cost them dearly, with Ocon falling all the way to the back. And yeah, Bearman's story, my god, that rear jack incident, that lost him a lot of time, and then he got a stop-go penalty for something he didn't do. He only followed the green light, so no wonder he decided to ultimately retire the car. What was even the point of staying out? And it's meant that Haas has fallen back behind Aston Martin in the championship, so, fun. But at the very least, Bearman got to see most of the race, unlike Nico Hülkenberg, who qualified a decent 11th and might have actually been on course for points since he overtook Charles Leclerc on pace. And it might have actually meant that he could have gotten past Gasly, and maybe he might have even been challenging for 8th. And I know that 8th doesn't really sound sexy to many fans out there, but this other, that's pretty gosh darn sexy. But then the clarity hit after he tried to overtake Pierre Gasly in admittedly a very bold move at a place where you really can't get many overtakes converted. And it's a place where Hülkenberg has had history before in crashing out, and unfortunately for him, Gasly wouldn't receive punishment. He was already being pinged due to unsafe rejoining the track, and it meant that Hülkenberg ultimately calls the safety car. No justice for him there, and the team lost an important tool in maybe trying to thrust themselves back into the hunt for 8th in the Constructors. Instead, Bortoleto had to become their priority in trying anything for points, but with his own 5-place grid drop, that was almost impossible. And now Nico is left with the very real notion that that move might have cost Sauber any hopes of going up the team standings, unless Abu Dhabi throws him a bone. And then in terms of throwing things, Hadjar's evening was a slow burner, which then threw itself into becoming a heartbreak story. He had a bad start, but then he managed to muddle through it. He won out really well in the pit battle with Russell especially, and it was a miracle that they didn't actually come to blows, and he then got as high as P6, which is a really impressive feat. Himself, again, muscling it in with the big guys and proving that he belonged. This was a really, really strong performance from the Frenchman. But then it all came undone due to his car giving up the ghost. It's some kind of deflector issue. You know, those little things that go above the tyre. It must have come loose and then it caused the puncture. They're going to be going away next year, so we won't see them again. And I'm pretty sure Isack will not want to see them again either. The only saving grace he can have that the reason why he fell down the order was not a skill issue. It was a very freak occurrence from a part that doesn't usually fail in those circumstances. Before all of that, no, he was absolutely on a tear. He was really doing well, having recovered from that tricky start. So you do look at Isack and you go, oh man, tough break, mate. And then you're just looking at what he's doing and thinking, come the announcement of the new Red Bull lineups for next year, being announced tomorrow, by the way. I don't know what I'm going to do with that. Am I going to do a video or maybe a live stream? You know, watch this space. Maybe subscribe to the channel to find out exactly what I do. But I think he's already blabbed it, that he knows that he'll be on the grid next year. And that's exactly what he did in F2 last year. He blabbed that he was going to be going to Racing Bulls earlier than he was supposed to. Yeah, he's got a very slippery mouth, that kid. But yeah, he had the speed, but luck escaped him today. So, shame. And then Lance Stroll. Oh, jeez. What a way to perform in front of your new boss, eh? Adrian Newey's first weekend as de facto team principal, or at least him getting his eye in before he starts work next year, and then Lance goes and performs like that. And seriously, if there was one person that you had to really impress in front of, it is Adrian Newey, whom I personally believe at this point, with him now the team principal, is now right up there in terms of power and influence with Papa Stroll. There could easily be a situation where Adrian goes, look, I know you love your kid, Lawrence, but that kid does not deserve to be in this car. Oh yeah, Adrian, what are you gonna do? Well, you either change your arm or I walk. Goodbye. And he could do that. Leave Aston Martin in the lurch, and then nobody will fill in the gap, or not certainly to the caliber of Newey. It's a very interesting plot point that will be very curious next year. Political détente. But yes, Lance lived through a very messy weekend again at this track. This is one of his bogey tracks. He never has a good time here. Whereas Alonso, he did what he could to reach as high as 6th, he had a wobble, but he still picked up valuable points. Him being the one in lifting Aston Martin back up to 7th place in the Constructors. What did Lance do? Nothing. He was locked to the back. And then having to do more than 2 stops. I think at one point it was like 3 or 4 or something like that. But this isn't the 2000s, mate, when you could actually do that. No, 2 stops are considered extravagant these days. And then he got a ping for speeding in the pit lane, so another 5-second time penalty for that. And yeah, that was pretty much it. So for somebody really trying to convince the bigwigs and the brand new heads of state within Aston Martin that he is up there with Fernando, and the guy is like approaching 45 and he's now actually expecting his first child. So, I mean, God knows what his kid's going to be like. He's going to be right up there. Oh, Max's kid and Fernando's kid in the future in the 2040s. My God, that's going to be magical. This really didn't help him one bit to really state his case that he is ready to go next year. And then Alpine came into Sunday with maybe hoping to score some points from Gasly's Q3 appearance and then wound up with nothing. Gasly going off at turn 14, that damaged the car. Then he completely collapsed in his collision with Hülkenberg, and then he fell to the back behind his teammate. Nowhere to go as a result. And in turn, after a fairly good and solid run leading the team, whilst Colapinto has been driving on eggshells so as to not crash the car, because this was a very important time in his career last year, Franco, where crashes blew him an opportunity to be with Red Bull. And one of the cardinal rules of Briatore is in don't crash. Well, Pierre crashed and cost them points potentially. And as for Colapinto's race, I mean, that was always going to be tricky. He started from the pit lane on the hards after setup changes, and then he needed chaos or clever planning to move forward. But then we had the lap caps, and that boxed everyone into conventional plans, so there was no room to be bold. He did make up a few places. He got up to 14th, but then that was all he could do. The only thing they actually could glean was that they did some testing for Abu Dhabi, that maybe they have some clues as to what to do. But that was it, really. Gasly had an opportunity to score, and he blew it. And now we get to the mess section, and Bortoleto starts us off with a fine but not special bin. The 5-place grid penalty from Las Vegas really set the tone as to what he could actually do, and it meant that there was no room for standing out strategy-wise. He ended up just looking at Lewis's bum for most of the night. Yeah, he did manage to climb up 6 places ultimately. He got up to 13th, which is not too bad, but it was still not enough for him to score points. But maybe this is exactly what he needed, after a couple of weekends where he has been the talk of the town, and it's been more to do with his crashes and what have you. So maybe this is what he needed, just to be anonymous, then just get his head down, finish the season, and then see what he can do for 2026. There was some positive though. The team were quite happy with his execution. He didn't put a foot wrong really, and he did make some progress. But unfortunately, the errors of Las Vegas really did come back to haunt him. That's one thing that didn't stay in Vegas. And I'm pretty sure that he was frustrated that points may have been possible had he just kept it clean at the start of that particular race. But you just got to do what you got to do, and I think he did fine. And then Alex Albon, and this must have been absolutely galling for him, especially with the fact that we all thought he was going to be comfortably where he is in the championship standings, well ahead of Carlos Sainz. Well, now, the gap between he and the Spaniard is down to single figures. Uh-oh. His team rolled the dice with a hard tyre start, hoping for a chance to push hard because he had rubber that could easily last the 25 lap cap and then some. But then the early safety car blew the bloody doors off of that plan, so he had to follow the grid into the pit like a lamb, and then the traffic within the resulting mayhem cost him even more time. Time that he could not make up due to the fact that overtaking around here is very much living up to the stereotype of this being Monaco without walls. And as we saw, the car had the speed. What Carlos and Williams have been able to do is unlock much potential from very little development, and Alex could have stood to gain from it in making up for a middling qualifying and then maybe scoring a point or two to really add to Williams' day. But unfortunately, P11 just ended up being like a very annoying spot where it nearly did it, but it didn't. But I think in the bigger picture, Williams won't mind too much. The fact is, though, they were expecting this weekend to be absolutely terrible. It's all about medium and high-speed corners, and Williams should expect to be horrible here. But instead, look what they got. They almost had both cars in the points. That is something to be proud of. And they've locked out 5th place in the Constructors anyway, which Albon did a very good service toward in the first half of the season especially. So he can be proud of that in what he's been able to do in his journey with this team, the 4th season of his career with them. But yeah, going into the winter, this is a very much a muted finale, I must admit. And this is just yet another race where he hasn't scored anything, whereas Carlos has. And then, yes, he is going to be the talk of the town tomorrow, especially Yuki Tsunoda. I mean, he walked out of Qatar with a decent clutch of points to his pocket, because let's not forget what he was able to do in the sprint, out-qualifying Max Verstappen for the first time. That absolutely came out of nowhere, and it actually resulted in a decent package. Whereas the race, it just completely escaped him. Out in Q1 again. And he had no idea why. And I don't think even the team knew. But he did come away with a P10 after, like with Charles Leclerc, he gained from other people's misfortunes. And to some, admittedly, this might be seen as a bit of a pity point. But he was having to deal with what everyone else was having to do behind Fernando Alonso, and he was stuck in the middle of a DRS train. There was very little he could do, especially with the lap cap. To him, the car felt okay, he had okay pace, but the DRS trains were his undoing. Then Hadjar's late puncture threw him a bit of a bone. But the upside is that over the last stretch of races, he has consistently had a car that has managed to let him hover closer to Verstappen's orbit than before, but then team error thwarts the obvious momentum to that pace. And I feel like Qatar showed that he is doing a solid job, but there are many things conspiring against him, and it's just leading to him not being able to show progress at a time when there might be an outside chance of P2 in the Constructors, especially if Yuki can just hook everything up. When Max, well, we all know he's going to hook everything up, or as much as possible. And then we have George Russell. Oh, George, 49 seconds behind Max Verstappen. That is not how you probably wanted to end your Sunday now, was it? And then your teammate was 20 seconds closer to Verstappen. Oh, yeah, this is something, actually. This has been a really big wake-up call for George, the final third of the season, where Kimi Antonelli has suddenly come online, and George has been left wondering sometimes, what on earth has he got to do? And actually fighting the team sometimes. I mean, let's not forget Mexico. I don't call him a loser, though, but it was close. The trouble started from lights out when he lost positions at the start, and then he got a snap at turn 2, and then the safety car came out and he got stacked behind Antonelli, who had to wait a few seconds more because of traffic within the pit lane. Both Mercedes drivers suffered, and from there, he just had to settle into a long and patient grind. However, the car definitely had the pace, more pace than expected when it was actually in clean air. But as we saw from the vast majority of people, the cars just simply cannot overtake. They just get stuck in the DRS train, the penultimate race where we have DRS to hand. And sure, you can be as aggressive as you want, but if you're stuck in a queue, it's not going to get you anywhere really, unless you're prepared to make a big lunge into turn 1. But yeah, I will still call George or so, because he did come away with decent points, and Mercedes are this close to locking out P2 in the Constructors, so, you know, swings and roundabouts and what have you. It's just probably not a race which George particularly will remember fondly, and especially at a track where he actually kind of likes it. So yeah, damn squid. But then we get to the winners, and oh my goodness, Max Verstappen. This was yet, as I said earlier, another him slicing the deficit to Norris in a half. Now just a dozen points behind him. Verstappen maximising the chaos, himself saying he had nothing to lose, and the launch was absolutely key. He nailed the getaway, and he cleanly slipped past Norris into turn 1. And then come lap 7, the safety car, even though many people are diluting the achievements of Hannah Schmidt, the chief strategy officer at Red Bull, he was the first one on the road, and he could have easily made the call to just stay out there with the two McLarens, but they decided to lead everyone else into the pit lane, and therefore dictate it from there, making lap 32 the absolute goldmine. It just made sense. Red Bull pounced. And then, of course, when the two McLarens stopped, he inherited the lead, and then he pretty much stayed up to 15 seconds ahead of them. Piastri had a very spirited fight back to ultimately finish within 8 seconds of the Dutchman, but by the time at the end of the race, he had the ability to just cruise on home, preserve the tyres, do what he can, just keep it clean, and therefore pocket his 7th win of the season. Now all 3 championship challenges have equal amounts of wins. That is bonkers. And I don't think you need me to tell you that psychologically it's going to be a huge boost for Verstappen, who not that long ago, back in Brazil, thought that you could just forget about the championship, and look where he is right now. If he wins the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix and Lando isn't on the podium, then he'll have done it. That's not exactly hard to do, especially with Lando feeling absolutely rattled, and he actually finished this weekend in 4th place. If we get a repeat of what happened this weekend in Abu Dhabi, that's the 5th world title for the Dutchman. So therefore, Lando has to win. And I'm just getting a huge sense of camaraderie in the moment, all for the purpose of making McLaren suffer in terms of, you know, what they've actually been doing needling toward Red Bull, especially in the post-Hornet era where they are not the same team anymore. They don't deserve all that constant bar. All of this teamwork, this united front, may mean that whatever happens, Max will probably see out his contract. That maybe he just wants to muck in with these people who truly get him. They rally behind him, and they managed to rebound so well with this car, because it was all in the pursuit of making McLaren look like fools. And then we got to talk about Sainz. Unexpected smooth operator in the parking area, am I right? That came out of nowhere. I would even say this was better than what he did around Baku, because nobody expected what happened around Qatar. Oh, what's this? Is that the sound of a revenge arc coming right back round again? Ha ha ha! Yes! I knew this would happen! I just had to wait! I mean, starting 7th was decent in of itself, considering that no one was expecting Williams to be that good. Q3, nice. And then, look what happens in the race. Without even knowing it, you then suddenly see Carlos in 3rd place, Antonelli not really making much way to behind him, and then when Norris does get eventually behind him, he can't make up the difference. And then not to forget the start, where he went from 7th to 5th, capitalising on George's bad start, and it was looking like plain sailing. But then there was trouble. We got that on the radio. They constantly fed to Carlos's radio, and he went, "Oh no!" And then he had that turn 12 understeer due to some kind of internal fault, but it was enough for him to be able to survive. And what makes you really impressed with what Carlos did is that he claimed that they were trying some really wacky setup changes led by himself, and look what it goes and does, locking out the constructors with 1 race to go, even though it was pretty likely they were going to finish 5th anyway. But this was happening this year. All of the stuff they've been learning this year could easily go into next year. They start off on the right foot, where they operationally might be a whole of a lot smoother. You genuinely felt the emotion from James Vowles, whereas with Baku, they kind of knew that if they just kept things clean, they would have gotten it. Here though, a top 5 would have been nice. That would have been the peak. 3rd? And then people likening it to the fact that really this was probably the biggest signing of last year, that he's been able to do much more with Williams than he would have done at Ferrari, but as he keeps telling us, it's none of his business. The only business he has at the moment is tightening Williams up. Now, okay, Antonelli. First of all, leave Kimi alone! I've seen him being torn a new one on social media after Helmut Marko judged the Italian let Norris by because of the Mercedes connection, after what Giampiero Lambiase, Max's engineer, said over the radio after he hadn't actually seen the whole picture. A claim which Toto Wolff immediately rejected, and I personally agree with. And Kimi was on course for maybe challenging for yet another podium, and hopefully, in his own mind, securing the team's 2nd place in the Constructors with 1 race to go. That was the mission. There was also another mission. Finish where he was, he would have had 152 points, the same as Sir Lewis Hamilton, but crucially, he would have been 6th in the championship due to the fact that, well, he's got more podiums than Lewis. And then lap after lap, he was proving that he had a better handle on the situation than Russell did. Russell was like 20 seconds behind him. And then he was able to absorb most of the pressure from Norris behind him and was able to hold his own until the very end. And then Kimi just simply blew it with older tyres. Lando had fresher tyres and he was able to get through. It was just simply too much to bear. You got to remember, this is his rookie season. He's had to deal with so much pressure at the moment, and there was probably a lot of internal pressure to impress Toto and get that 2nd place. And yes, losing 4th place would have been frustrating, but it just showed that this weekend he was really, really solid. He belongs with the top guys. And to assume that he's become a mercenary for McLaren, oh, please, this is preposterous. Max has no bad blood toward him. I saw him in the media pen, Max, having a nice little chat with Kimi. No bad blood between them whatsoever. And why would Toto instruct him to do that? Because even though things have calmed down with Verstappen to Mercedes, it's still possible that it could happen. So if Max got wind that Toto instructed Kimi to find some way in meaning that Lando would score more points, do you think that would impress Max and make him want to come to Mercedes? He's trying to tempt Max. He's not trying to piss him off. So yeah, please, stop it. As far as I'm concerned, he was a winner this weekend because he was just better than George. He was in the race. And again, Kimi was on the cusp of being P6 in the championship until that moment. Why would he have thrown that away? And then Alonso. This was peak Fernando. This is the chaos merchant we've been missing out on recently. Him reminding me of Monaco 2021. You know, when we saw the days of Fernando Alonso, as in holding everybody up behind him and not allowing anyone past him, and making his potential 2012 Ferrari teammate Giga Kubica, very, very proud. And on a weekend where Aston Martin weren't really expecting any fireworks at all, and then the boss's son goes and does what he does, and being right near the bottom. Was Fernando near the bottom? No, he was right on top. He was there in Q3. He got as high as 6th place. And sure, the spin was a very uncharacteristic error, but he did keep it clean. He didn't put it in the barrier. He didn't wreck his floor. He still came away with a P7 at the end of the day. And then let's not forget the points he got in the sprint. He got 7th place in that one as well. 2 points there, 6 points here, 8 points. Critical for their place in the Constructors and getting right back past Haas again. It was Fernando that did it. Lance, nowhere to be seen. And again, this is the boss's first day in the office, and Fernando was right there impressing the pants off of him. I would love to know what Adrian wrote in his notebook. And then finally, Liam Lawson. He did what you would want a steady second driver to do on a chaotic weekend. Start a decent 12th and then just avoid any mess and pick up the pieces should they fall. His race, like many, was defined by Alonso, him being stuck in the DRS train and not really having much to do. Yes, he also profited from many other people having downfalls right in front of him. You know, Gasly, Hülkenberg, Hadjar, his teammate. And that was very important. At a time when Racing Bulls really wants to survive in 6th place in the Constructors, Lawson had to be there to at least salvage some points for the team, and he did just that. And even though Hadjar was the better driver on the day, Lawson still won out at a time where Red Bull is making a really major decision that could impact his future. So he just had to be out there and be dependable, and that's been his arc the entire season after his dismal start with Red Bull Racing, the senior team. He's now been able to transform himself into a fairly combative driver, but otherwise a dependable one should he remain on the track. So I just think what we've got here is a small win, but it's something. Points right at the end of the season when people's memories are the most fresh when it comes to the future of many other drivers. And another thing you can depend on is this video right here to provide you yet more entertainment as we wind down this season of Formula 1. I'll see you over there.